Where's Robinson? Hey, this little meeting keeps popping up from your team. Do you want me to sign out of it? David Caswell just joined your monthly meeting.
Just ignore it.
Just ignore it? Okay, that's fine.
Do this right here.
Oh,
That'll get rid of the.
oh no, but then how do I go back? Okay.
That if you do that.
Can you make them, two of them, be side by side? Oh yeah, I like that. That's kind of nice.
That'll just get rid of the. Then you can do this like this and say.
Do you use Teams? Is that what you're using?
This is new. I normally use
There you go.
not typing.
Now you just have.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. Okay, we'll give it like 2 more minutes while people trickle in, and then we'll start.
They do. All professional and whatnot. I wet it down when I showered.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. For those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Bing. I'm with Kimley Horn. I'm a traffic engineer there, and I'm super excited to be moderating this panel with representatives from large corporations in Georgia. So how the panel is going to work is we'll go ahead and introduce all 3 of our speakers first, and then each of the speakers will have about 3 to 5 minutes to tell us a little bit about themselves and their corporation. And then I have prepared a few questions for us to get started with the discussion about lessons learned from the pandemic, and then we will welcome any questions that y'all may have from the audience. Okay, so our first speaker, who is here with us in person, Lauren Udell, is best known as Tom's wife and has spent the past 8 years at Chick-Fil-a Support Center in marketing on the brand strategy team. Her current role is in agency management, where she leads the relationships with the creative, media, and marketing agencies. Prior to this role, Lauren worked at a small creative agency for 20 years on a team that supported Chick-fil-A. Lauren received her Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from West Georgia College in Advertising Design. Lauren and Tom have been married for 17 years and were married here at the King and Prince. They have 3 awesome grown kids, Catherine, Grayson, and Brian, and just hosted the beautiful wedding of their oldest, Catherine, to her college sweetheart, Sebastian. Lauren has been coming to summer seminars since 2004 and is responsible for affectionately naming the conference Nerd Fest. Welcome, Lauren. And then virtually we have 2 speakers. Our first is Shauna Waller. Shauna is the manager of material control in Kia Georgia's production control department, managing the flow of tens of thousands of automotive parts from every corner of the earth to the West Point, Georgia facility each day. Waller's career began as a college student working in a Tier 3 automotive operation, where she developed a fascination with the mechanics and complexity of the automotive supply network and changed her major in order to pursue a career in this industry. Progressing through larger companies in the supply chain to an OEM position was not easy for a young female in what was predominantly seen as a man's environment. But Waller's determination and commitment to perfection in her work opened doors of opportunity and earned the respect of her network of colleagues. Aside from a solid work ethic, Waller attributes much of her success to the lessons she's learned in respecting the opinions of the people that she works with. Waller states, "I've learned through my experience that people have ideas and want to be valued. When they feel appreciated, they become more engaged in finding the best ways to get our goals accomplished." Waller has worked at Kia Georgia for over 12 years with increasing levels of responsibility. When she's not saving the world of Kia Georgia's operations, she finds her greatest satisfaction spending time outdoors with her family, her husband, son, and their English bulldog. And then our final speaker, who's also joining us virtually, Bob Gerlach. Bob is the Director of Global Health and Safety for UPS. He lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and has responsibility for all international health and safety activities. Originally from Minnesota, Bob and his family have relocated from Minneapolis to Kansas City to Brussels and then to Atlanta. While attending the University of Minnesota, Bob started a part-time job unloading packages for UPS. After graduation, he continued his career at UPS in various roles from operations to human resources, including health and safety, both domestically and internationally. Thanks, guys. So our first speaker is going to be Lauren Udell. So I'm going to switch out the PowerPoint.
I need that. I need this.
While she's doing that, thank you guys so much for having me. I feel like I know so many and have grown close to so many of you over the years, but then I look out in this audience and I feel like I don't know hardly any of you. So I'm really honored to be here, so thank you. You got it. So I think Bing pretty much did a good job of introducing myself, but I don't think I need to do that again. So I'll just dive right into the Chick-fil-A story. I assume that because this is a Georgia conference that most of you know Chick-fil-A and at least know a little bit about Chick-fil-A. So I tried to find something that we have that is a little bit interesting and should maybe not be repeatable, or you might have heard it before. So a little bit about our history. Truett Cathy founded Chick-fil-A back in 1946. I'll tell you a little bit about that, but I love this quote that he says, "We change the world and ourselves and our response to unexpected opportunities," and I thought that was apropos for today's talk. So back in 1946, Truett founded, like I said, the Dwarf Grill. He and his brother Ben started right near in Hapeville, down by Delta Airlines, and it was just a 10-stool diner back then, and the Dwarf Grill is no longer standing. That place actually burned down, and another tragedy that happened around that time is his brother Ben was killed in a airplane accident. And so, but they did have the dream of having the diner, and didn't quite know at that time what would happen in later years. And so, let me make sure I'm right. This is different. So let's see. Let me go back one. Sorry, I'm not used to doing this. Does anybody know what 1964 signifies? Usually you hear that Chick-fil-A was founded in 1967. But this was a moment of unexpected opportunities when his friends, Jim and Hal Good, who supplied chicken to Delta Airlines back then, he took the breasts off their hands that they were not going to sell. And that's how he figured out how to hand bread and fry the chicken sandwich. And so that is actually when the sandwich was invented. He is the sole inventor, and he ran that tiny restaurant. He slept in the back of it, and anytime he would hear tires roll into his gravel parking lot, he'd get up and fix a meal, because there were a lot of Ford employees and Delta employees that ran crazy shifts, and he just lived to serve them. And so that lives on today, as you can imagine, in how we serve our guests. So let's see, in 1967 is the year that we went into a mall environment. So that's the picture. An actual photo is probably the only one, it's the only one I've ever seen, of the front counter in Greenbrier Mall. And so he really had to beg the mall tenant to let him in to the mall environment, because there was no food in a mall back in those days. And that was another one of Truett's ideas that, I would think maybe that y'all might not know of. So that recipe that he perfected then has now inspired us, still inspires us today through all of our innovation, his innovative spirit and his giving spirit, into over 2,600 locations today. So we are in, gotta keep up. we are now in freestanders, as you know, and in big cities as well. And so we expanded. Our first big city location was Chicago. Now we're in New York City, Seattle, Toronto, and soon to be Hawaii and Puerto Rico. So those are our next international expansions. And I have a feeling before too long we'll be in Singapore. I don't know why, so that's not a question you can ask me, because I don't know why Singapore. But we do love expanding the brand to these new locations and having the opportunity to meet and greet and serve people all across the world. So our business, as I mentioned, we have over 2,600 restaurants, over 200,000 team members, of which my son is one of them right now. And we did just over $14 billion in sales in 2020. A real big shock, I think, to most of us, and we'll get into a little bit more of why. But in 2019, we were just at barely 10. So, it's just really grown and really taken off. So our food, let's talk a little bit about our food that you guys know so much. Like I said, it all began with Truett and his sandwich, the ultimate classic, and it stood the test of time. He created, like I said, more than 50 years ago, and it's still as in demand as ever. And I think I'd like to call out a few reasons why that's significant. Number one, it is handcrafted. Today in the restaurants, we use 100% antibiotic-free chicken. Starts from the egg all the way to when you eat it. It's all about the pickles too. There are 2 pickles, and we're trained on how to make those sandwiches. Those pickles do not touch. They go on the bottom bun, buttered on both sides, and the chicken goes on top of that. The pickles are made for us. Cucumber slices soaked for 3 days, no less. Little trivia there. And then it's pressure cooked in peanut oil. And Truett also invented the machine that it's fried in today, so it's called the Henny Penny. But after it's peanut oil, and people don't realize that even if you have a peanut allergy, you're not necessarily allergic to that sandwich, because it's refined peanut oil and it doesn't cause allergies. And the recipe's top secret still. It's hidden in a safe. I know where the safe is. Nobody gets in it. And then last but not least, there's a lot of innovation going on, not around that sandwich, but around our food and our menu to meet the customer demands of today. So we're always looking for new and things that people want, healthier food. It's so funny. One of the statistics I like to talk about is if you ask a customer what they'd like to see more of on our menu, they always say more healthy items. But then just as soon as they say that, they walk up and order the number one sandwich, fries, and a Coke. So anyway, that's a little bit about our food. I wanted to close out with, I know I'm probably running long, aren't I? Okay, I'll wrap it up in a second. So a few food items that you might not be so familiar with. We have a gluten-free bun. I bet you didn't know that. And if you haven't tried our grilled chicken, you should. It's really great. It's marinated in sea salt, lemon, garlic, and herbs. It's delicious. We've just done that, a new recipe over the last, I think it was 4 years ago. And for breakfast, maybe you haven't tried the egg white grill. It's on a muffin. It's grilled. It's good for you. It's healthy. So try that if you haven't. And our superfood side, it's delicious. It's kale crunch now. So it's kale and almonds and a really good dressing. So those are some of my favorite, more healthy menu items. And then I can't help but stop this by talking about our people. And so we have an owner-operator model. It is a franchise model, but it's the operator owns the business. Chick-Fil-a Inc. owns the bricks and mortar. And those folks are really dedicated to bringing along those team members. It's yes, it is about running a restaurant business, but it's also about investing in people and investing in communities. And so they're real entrepreneurs, but it's a partnership. We like to call we're in partnership with them. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll close out with what I'll say are my favorite 3 Chick-fil-A moments, so you can get to know a little bit more about me. Back when I started 8 years ago, I spent 10 weeks of training in the restaurant, and I did every single position at least once. And that was the highlight of it, was making biscuits. I love that. It was a blast. It was probably the hardest time I've been through in my 8 years, but I absolutely look back on it with fond memories, and I'm so glad I had the chance to do that because new staff members don't get a chance to do that anymore. I got to travel with Dan, Kathy, Truett's son, to a grand opening via our corporate jet, which was a blast. He asked me to keep time up for the whole trip. We were in and out of restaurants. We flew to 3 different cities after we opened the restaurant. We slept overnight in the restaurant that opened. We slept in the playground, the girls did, because it's got a little bit softer floor than the rest of the restaurant. And then the third one is Grayson, enjoying the summer. He's working at the restaurant down the street in Decatur, and going through the drive-thru while he's working is something else, I'll tell you what. And he knows more about that drive-thru than I do, that's for sure. So anyway, I'll wrap up with that and just really thank you guys again.
Okay, sounds good. Shauna, would you like to go next? Hold on. I think we need some audio.
Yes, I can certainly do that. Everything ready on your end?
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry, I thought that you were going to share your screen for the presentation, but I can go ahead and pull it up. Actually, Bob, why don't you go first, and I'll pull up Shauna's presentation. Sorry about that.
All right, sound check. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, how about a video check? Can you see the slide? All right. I think most everybody recognizes, obviously, the brown vehicles from around the world. Obviously, you know, the best salespeople of our business and the best representatives are what you see on the streets and the businesses and the residential areas around the world. But, you know, going back to the start, you know, what essentially was a dream by a couple of teenage boys in August of 1907 in Seattle, Washington, by renting a 6x17 space under a sidewalk as their basement office, has become 114 years later, a global organization providing logistics services around the world. As the years progressed through the 20th century, so did our business activities, the U.S. expansions through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even the 80s, with the U.S. state expansions. In 1975, we went into our first international opportunity, which was north of the border to Canada. And in 1976, we went to Europe and expanded into Germany. In the late 80s and 90s is when our international expansions accelerated, starting with Europe and then around the globe. Through all of this, and since the early beginnings, safety has been ingrained in our policies, procedures, and our methods from the beginning, and continually updated through all of the UPS transformations. At the top, you'll see kind of our current slogan, moving our world forward by delivering what matters, has never been more appropriate, especially considering what has happened the last 18 months. And you think about the pandemic. As one of the world's largest package delivery companies, UPS provides a broad range of integrated logistics solutions for customers in more than 220 countries and territories worldwide. The company has more than 540,000 employees who embrace a strategy that is simply stated and powerfully executed: customer first, people led, and innovation driven. We are also committed to reducing our impact on the environment and supporting the communities we serve around the world. We refer to our 13,000 alternative fuel fleet of vehicles as a rolling laboratory to test and invest in better ways to get packages from the shippers to the receivers. UPS also takes a strong and unwavering stance in the support of diversity, equality, and inclusion. In the U.S., the bulk of our commercial drivers are in what we call our small package, which typically we all know those are the packages, obviously, that come to our homes and deliver all those wonderful surprises that either you ordered or somebody else ordered unknowingly. The small package business unit, which is basically our brown package delivery van drivers, as well as what we call our tractor trailers or feeders, because they essentially feed the network that covers the globe. We also have some commercial drivers in our UPS freight forwarding business. Our workforce of delivery drivers is supported and grown by a unique driver training program called Integrad. It encompasses 3 primary modes for delivering training to new employees in a teach me, show me, let me model, which is highly effective to take someone newly hired and give them the skills to be a UPS service professional. All the components of the job, especially working safely and driving safely, are taught and mastered through various learning stations. The intersection of safety training and application yields the success of our people. Most importantly, it's about ensuring everyone arrives home every night to their most important stop. Of all the deliveries UPS makes each day, truly none are more important than the last one of the day, which for some is in the middle of the night or the next day when they get home to loved ones. For decades, we have recognized our workforce of drivers for their safe driving achievements. At the end of 2020, we had over 10,000 individuals who around the world had achieved what some think is impossible, which is going 25 years or more without an avoidable crash. Years of dedication and diligence to protect themselves, the driving public, their vehicle, and ultimately the customer's cargo are ultimate importance. These individuals travel the roads of the world every day, changing conditions, from the heat of summer to sub-zero freezing temperatures in the deep of winter. One thing they have in common with you is they depend on the transportation infrastructure to do their job safely and efficiently. From the side streets to interstates, from county roads to motorways around the world, our drivers benefit from your work each and every day. To travel to their work area can take minutes or hours, and then to deliver to the customer what may be an important business document, critical machinery parts, simple home necessity, or needed medication, you create our opportunity for success. Our organization relies heavily on the very skilled and agile function of engineers to support our network, both the ground and air. Our operation planning and the measures we track its efficiency, as well as managing and enhancing our vehicle fleet, our buildings, and our technology systems, which we depend on. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this year's conference. Looking forward to questions.
Thanks, Bob. Shauna, would you like to try share your screen again?
Yes. Let's.
Yeah, there it is.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Shauna Waller from Kia, Georgia in West Point, Georgia. We're going to go through a couple of facts about the facility and the manufacturing that we do here in West Point. The site name is officially known as Kia Georgia, Inc. We've recently went through a corporate identity change that we'll talk a little bit more about later. The site was announced in March of 2006. We started production in November of 2009, so just shortly 3 years to construct the facility. The site sits on 2,200 acres. The building pad itself consists of 650 acres. It was a $1.8 billion investment for the Hyundai Motor Group, and we employ 2,700 team members here at the facility. Our manufacturing operation consists of 3 shifts over the 5-day work week, and at full production capacity, we can produce 340,000 vehicles per year. To review some of our key milestones for the facility, it's been quite a story for the Kia Georgia group here. So again, in March of 2016, the site was selected there shortly after the groundbreaking ceremony took place. In November of 2009, we celebrated the start of production for our flagship vehicle, the Sorrento. In February in 2010, we had our grand opening ceremony. And then a year later, we launched the Optima midsize sedan. Shortly thereafter, in 2012, we expanded the plant facility and our stamping shop. And in 2013, we celebrated production of our 1 millionth vehicle. That was quite a celebration for a lot of us that have seen every single vehicle produced at this plant. A few years ago, in 2019, we launched our third vehicle platform with the Telluride start of production. We're very proud of that one. And shortly thereafter, we had our 10-year anniversary at the facility. And in 2020, we had two milestones aside from a pandemic of the launch of the K5 sedan in May, and in September, the 2021 Sorrento. And here recently, this past spring, early summer, we did our Kia rebrand. So we've gone through a rebrand and a corporate identity change, and moving forward to a lot better things. Looking at the product mix of what we build here in West Point, we have the Telluride midsize SUV, which is our most recent addition to our fleet. It is the largest vehicle in Kia's fleet. It was designed in the U.S. for our U.S. consumers. We do export this vehicle to the Middle East. A couple details about the vehicle itself. It's available with a V6 engine and a 3-row interior. We are also in production of our third generation Sorrento. The Sorrento comes with 2 engine options and a standard 3-row interior. The K5, formerly known as the Optima, is our third generation midsize sedan. It also has 2 engine options, and it is Kia's most powerful midsize sedan. Some details of technology that we've introduced recently. We've got the 10-inch high-resolution touchscreen, the rear occupant alert, and us mothers will appreciate that. Even for pets, it works quite well. The advanced driver assistance system, our surround view monitoring, and our wireless charging, and it does charge up to 8 USB ports. Some accolades that the plant has received is the highest initial quality J.D. Powers Award, the SUV of the year from the Motor Trend, and World Car Awards. Kia Georgia supports its local community in several different areas, focusing on education and health and wellness, safety, and diversity and inclusion. And we have worked diligently within our local community to build foundations and education programs to support our local economy. And recently, with our brand transformation, we've moved to a different slogan. We used to be the power to surprise, and now our slogan is movement that inspires, so that we can start developing vehicles that are more technologically advanced into the electrical market, and start kind of launching us into a new competitive realm of automation.
Thanks, Shauna. Is this microphone working? Hey, Paul. Okay. Thanks, guys. Okay, so the first question I have for our panelists is, how did the pandemic affect your corporation from a materials and logistics standpoint? And what changes did you have to make to ensure continued service to the end client? So, Lauren, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I think for Chick-Fil-A, literally everything changed, right? We're a restaurant business, and so we closed all 2,600 dining rooms. And so that was tough. But I think that really I'm going to talk more about logistics here. But I think because of the strategic bets that we placed many years ago and really pushed hard on in the last 5 to 10 years, we were able to sustain it. And those are because of a couple things. Number one is our app. We heavily invested in our Chick-Fil-a app. That started development in 2014. And I remember I was 1 year in at that time, and I remember thinking, nobody's going to order Chick-fil-A over the app. Why would we do that? Just go through the drive-through. Well, that's because we have smart people in the business, and they could see ahead much further than I could at the moment. And so another one is because of innovation in the area of our subsidiary. We began 2 subsidiary brands. One is called Chick-Fil-a Supply, and it's a distribution and logistics company. And so we really started Chick-Fil-a Supply to bring the food and the supplies to the restaurants, and it's because the logistics industry has continued. I'm sure Bob can probably talk more about this, but it's tough, especially for QSRs. No one really wants to deliver for QSRs, and on top of that, Chick-fil-A is probably the most demanding one. We want the deliveries in the middle of the night when the store's not open. There's no room for a truck during the day, so and it's hard to find drivers, and so we decided if we attached our name to a logistics company, we might be successful, and we have been so far. We opened the first one last year and serve over 200 restaurants with that one, and we've got plans in the making to open another one in Texas. And then the second subsidiary is Bay Center Foods, and Bay Center is actually the mall in Tampa where Dan and Kathy founded Lemon. He figured out how to make and serve lemonade, and so it's about our lemons. And so we have taken the greatest technology from all over the world and put together what you've probably heard HPP. It's high pressurized pasteurization, and we squeeze and it's the freshest juice you can possibly get. But it's cut down on waste. It's cut down on team member time. It's reduced complexity in the restaurant by almost 3%, which is huge. It's reduced the space required. It's improved team member experience because it was really the last thing people wanted to do in the back of the house is juice lemons. So up until earlier this year, we were juicing the lemons in the restaurant, and you get higher yield and less waste from doing that. And then the third strategic bet we placed is on upstream ordering. If you've been through our drive-thru in the last year, you know that we're out in the drive-thru with iPads. And that was something that we innovated and rolled out back in 2014 or 15 when we went to New York City. So it wasn't even developed for the drive-thru, it was developed for long lines in the new cities that we were going to. And so I think because of those 3 things is why we fared okay through that, but we really weren't certain. And I can't imagine where we would be now if we hadn't done those things back over the last 5 to 10 years.
Thanks, Lauren. Bob, do you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, it's interesting when you look back, and even from an international standpoint, that some of our areas were impacted, obviously, long before the U.S. was. But even if you think back to probably Q2 of last year in the spring, what was happening so fast, being that we're, in the logistics business, and how do you get something from point A to point B? Our business model prior to the pandemic, most of it was essentially B2B. So we were servicing, obviously, larger businesses. And there was this thing called online ordering and the internet and e-commerce, and it was growing at a pretty good pace, probably for the last decade. And then suddenly, when you tell majority of the world, hey, you got to stay home because of this pandemic, and then the ability of the internet and online shopping and even basic necessities, I keep remembering standing in line trying to get toilet paper and paper towels, and being one of those, individuals standing in a long line, having, a couple bundles of each going, because it was that panic mode of when am I going to get this next and when is the supply going to run out? And suddenly, you could order all of this and have it delivered at home, especially if you were either, and again, out of work and or, as most people were doing, started to do remote work, which was something new for us as well, having to understand that, we had a little bit of exposure to, I think, the whole, remote work. But the infrastructure, having people have remote access, VPNs, the equipment and laptops to do so also was one of the big challenges that impacted us. Obviously, for an individual who works in our operations, if you're basically close to the movement of packages, there was really no option to work from home. You still had to go in. So from a health and safety standpoint, one of our greatest concerns is how do we protect all of our employees who are still having to show up to work, understanding that now from a supply standpoint, it really shifted to the priorities were essentially masks, hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes. So having to kind of, we quickly pulled in business continuity and said, hey, to obviously keep our businesses up and running, what were the priority necessities that we had to go through to understand whether either we had an inventory and or needed to order early and get the acquisitions in place, because we knew that supply chains were definitely going to be impacted by all this. So trying to move ahead of that. The problem was at that time, majority of the world was in the same mode, and pretty much, all companies, big and small, were in that same thought process of we need to get the supplies now. So again, a major disruption to supply chains and to, productions where they were, because especially, the ones that were overseas, then you already had areas that were impacted by the pandemic and were in shutdown. So whatever supplies or whatever materials were already in motion, that was going to limit, obviously, what was going to be available for the next coming months. So you kind of work through that, I think, in Q2. By Q3, Q4, some of that kind of settled out. As we know, as the pandemic timeline kind of rolled out, I think our biggest change in process and procedures was really in the operations to understand, hey, how do we end up making sure that, again, holding everyone accountable to wearing masks, social distancing, putting some of those in place. We had to create new procedures for, again, we could no longer put 2 individuals in a vehicle, 2 individuals in a trailer. It was going to be isolated, so you would have single individuals. So, it was just that whole new routine and understanding of what we were doing to keep the business up and running. I think there was also a new understanding of, what the concerns were about who's feeling ill. In the past, it was kind of one of those, unless you were significantly ill, then you didn't come to work. Now it was, if you had any minor symptoms, or even if you were in doubt, it was, you need to stay home, because there was a whole new expectation and a whole new concern that I think was driving the awareness of what was creating or what was influencing this pandemic. So there was a lot of lessons learned, I think, through the first few months, because we'd never been through a pandemic before. No one had ever been through this global pandemic. But I think we'll get into more discussions later about, what you can do, as we look down the road to the future. We don't know where the next one might come from, but I think the lessons learned have taught us, that planning and having coordination for business continuity is essentially, it's business critical.
Thanks, Bob. Shauna.
So certainly the pandemic, as both have mentioned, put Kia in a whole new ball game at that point. Our production plan had to take a drastic shift. We did have to shut down production for several weeks, and I compare that to steering the Titanic. It's a 24-hour operation, and we're operating on a global supply chain, and telling us basically that we need to, shut the plant down for an extended period of time without fully knowing exactly how long that was going to be, certainly presented a lot of challenges for our logistics group and our inventory managers. So, we have extremely good support from our global subsidiaries that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So they were able to help us react really fast and quickly, and kind of put in a plan B, if you will, because even though manufacturing was going to stop in West Point, our supply line was still shipping. We had vessels, on the water traveling to Savannah Port, which is our primary port of entry. And that material has to continue to flow, whether the plant producing or not. So we had to look at, some extreme measures of how do we pull in hundreds of containers of material, and where do we put that? We certainly don't have an infrastructure of, warehousing and locations to unload these trailers and with this material. So what do we do with it? So it took a lot of, brainstorming and thinking and collaborations with our overseas logistics group, our on-site team here of, what can we do with the material and where can we put it, and along with keeping it in the order that we needed to receive it. We use a lot of FIFO methods, so first in, first out. We have changes that are in route to us that we have to use old material before new. So there's things like that are coordinated that still have to, be respected and kept in order. So just like what, was mentioned before, the pandemic brought on a lot of new challenges for us. Once that initial production stop occurred and we resumed production at the facility, it flowed like normal again. It was just at a slower pace. So once we were in production, it got a lot easier for us to manage through. It's the initial halt that really caught us off guard, because we weren't expecting that. Just as Bob mentioned, nobody planned for the pandemic. So no one plans to bring in 400 containers worth of material to store for 4 to 6 weeks. And we did, and we got through it, and we did it pretty successfully. The plant had no interruption from a productivity perspective from what we had to do. So the plant really didn't know any different when production resumed. So in our mind, that was a huge success, because we're the behind the scenes people feeding the manufacturing plants the material, just kind of like what UPS is doing to us. Thank you, UPS, for keeping running, because you brought a lot of things to us. But we're that group that's behind the scenes, pulling the strings and making sure everything stays on point and on time. And we had to go to a lot of using the virtual meetings, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And again, the app that Chick-fil-A used, we also have an app with Kia that helped us communicate to our employees major announcements or things when you return to work. Here's the things that you need to do, be prepared for. Entrance into the facility is going to be different. We're going to have temperature checks and things to that nature. So, it changed everything on how we do business, the pandemic. So.
Thanks, Shauna. Okay, the second question I had was, with the decreased commuter traffic on roads and more remote work flexibility, were there any initiatives that your corporation used the pandemic as an opportunity to accelerate? Do you want to go first, Lauren?
Sure. I do think it did give us a lot of opportunity to accelerate in a few areas. One is delivery. And so just like I couldn't have foreseen the app and its usage, I also didn't really understand delivery and why we would want to deliver food, especially waffle fries that get cold in 10 minutes. But we had done a little bit of work around how to get the food, how do you package it, how do you get it to people that's still hot and fresh and to a standard that we would be acceptable to us. So we did ramp up on what we used, DoorDash and Grubhub, all of those, but we ramped up on Chick-fil-A delivery. And so I think you'll see, I think there's 600 restaurants or so doing their own delivery now, and the goal is to have 2,500 by the year 2025. So 2,500 restaurants by 2025. So we really are ramping up delivery. Ghost kitchens. Have you guys ever heard of ghost kitchens? Do you know what those are? Okay, so We built our own ghost kitchen to test during the pandemic in Nashville, and it'll actually, I don't even know if I'm supposed to be talking about this honestly, but it will open in August. I'm teasing. No, I'm teasing. It's out. But it's got its own brand name. It's called Little Blue Menu, and Little Blue Menu, it was named that because Truett at the Dwarf Grill had a Little Blue Menu, and it was just one page. And so we took that as a piece of our history and named it that. But we've got three new brands that we've created, and then we're inviting some other brands to participate as well. And we'll deliver to a 10-mile radius in Nashville, and if that's successful, we will expand that. So just trying all things around delivery and getting the food in more hands faster. And then we also, inside the support center, we had staff redeployments, and I think that those not only accelerated, but they'll continue to be offered. So I actually was redeployed for 9 months during the pandemic, and now that it's over and we've all gone back to our jobs, it was just kind of an all hands on deck, whatever the business needed, we went and did. And so now there are temporary assignments that somebody will need help with for 6 or 9 months, and we have the opportunity, they're posted, we have the opportunity to raise our hand for them. So those are some things I think we used the pandemic time well for.
Thanks, Lauren. I know I definitely ordered a lot of Chick-fil-A delivery, so thank you for that. Bob, do you want to take a stab at it?
Sure. I think the pandemic, it changed the world in which we all exist and conduct business in so many different ways. I mean, for us, obviously, it accelerated us because first there was this, like I was talking about, the online ordering and how, with e-commerce and shifting our business from B2B to B2C. So all the residential deliveries that happened in, really it was more May and June of last year, which then required a hiring surge to put on the people, obviously, to help deal with this volume surge. And I think as the world has seen, the ability of, internet ordering, e-commerce has not let up. So that's going to continue, I think, to grow. I think what it taught us is we probably had to accelerate how adaptable we are and how agile we are to take, existing processes and then be able to adapt them to the needs, if you will, of, local economics, local markets. In this case, everything was basically a surge. There was just more of everything. Although, back to our first discussion, the first question, obviously the challenge too was then the supplies that we need, the logistics of managing your own supply network and your inventories are challenged as well because the entire supply chain in some cases was being disrupted. I think one of the things that accelerated too was just the use of virtual meetings, obviously, since so many people were working remote. We had to get used to, and I think we all felt this pain early on, that some other platforms, they weren't ready for it either. And they had to adapt and build out as quick as possible that ability to handle such massive volumes of virtual meetings. And in the end, you look back over the last year, a lot of people will tell you more about the frustrations, but they're constantly on Zoom meetings and team meetings and everything else. But if it wasn't for that, we'd be significantly challenged as to how we would connect. Yeah, you can do audio, but video, sure, just like we're doing right here, being remote, but it still brings a whole nother level of communication and understanding. Although I think we all agree that there's nothing better than being physically present, with each other, because that's just another whole level. But unfortunately, in a pandemic, that's a challenge too, and a concern that has to be managed. I know through the pandemic, we've tried to keep, two critical areas in focus. And one is our people and their well-being, but also then our customers, and how do we keep delivering for our customers, knowing that in some cases,
Oh, 1 second, Bob. I think we lost your audio. Did he lose our audio too?
helped us create a laser focus on making sure that those two components in everything we do, when we take care of the customers, take care of our people, we take care of our communities, and make sure that we all get through this together.
Thanks, Bob. Shauna?
Yeah, certainly. Again, I agree with Bob. It changed the course of how we conducted daily business. And, once we resumed operations here at the facility, we took advantage of technology. And even while we were working remotely, technology really saved us because it allowed us to do the virtual meetings with forums that we probably wouldn't have considered prior to the pandemic. We would have done a conference call or a face-to-face meeting and stopped at that had we not had the technology available to us. Several have laptops and VPN connections, phones, and that type of resources to us. So, and not to mention, keeping in contact with our supply base once we did start running production and get the plant started up again, because several of our suppliers, especially in North America, still weren't running production because they're supplying other OEMs who hadn't quite started their ramp up yet. So keeping communications open with them, we use a web-based portal to communicate to our suppliers, to get live feedback from them and direct orders and confirmations. So using all of that data on a real-time basis helped us know what our status was. Did we need to make any adjustments to our scheduling, or could we keep a constant flow? And utilizing those resources really helped us just start the plant up slow. We started at a one shift operation. Then we gradually moved to a 2-shift and then was able to get the 3rd shift back up and running. And, keeping in mind of our own employee base and their wellness and health at the same time, and understanding what were the contingencies that we needed to put in place to bring 2,700 people back together in one facility. It's not a small facility by any means, but still you're containing people within, a 4-walled structure. So, in dealing with the pandemic that none of us have any information about or have any understanding of its ramifications other than what we all heard from the news and in our CDC guidelines. So the virtual meetings, I think for us were crucial because again, we're dealing with global resources. So we've got vendors, obviously in Korea and other parts of the world that otherwise we wouldn't have really been able to communicate through other than email. And sometimes that's not always the best avenue for communications.
Thanks, Shauna. I wanted to take a minute to see if there were any questions from the audience. John Karnowski, can you use the microphone, please? Thank you.
Thank you, long time listener, first time caller. My name's John. Mrs. Udell, Chick-Fil-A, I'm a big fan. I am.
Thank you, sir.
Way more sandwiches than I should have. But one of the things about Chick-fil-A, and this question could actually pertain to any of y'all, but you have a certain brand about you, a reason why people go to Chick-fil-A. It's not just because it's got an awesome chicken sandwich, that is true, and the kale, not so good. But the
You probably never tried it.
yeah, probably not. So it doesn't look like it, does it? So you have this brand about you. It's the people. It's the oh, thank you, my pleasure. That kind of thing. How is it when you expand and go to all these other markets? How do you continue to foster that culture that you have? And during the pandemic, how did you keep that culture alive and well as you had to constantly deal with change? And again, this could be a question for the other two as well.
Sure, thank you for that. Because I sit on the brand strategy team, it's nice that you recognize that and acknowledge that, first of all, so thank you. It really all starts with Truett and the model that he set out. And the owner-operators are We have over 10,000 applicants a year to be an operator. First of all, because it's low in cost to get started, but really because we are super selective with who we hire, and there's a very long process for getting hired as an operator. And so I think it starts now with that operator model, and that owner-operator's one job aside from running the restaurant, like I said, was to bring in those team members and set up that environment of care and service. Back to the brand that you mentioned, our actual, our brand, I'm looking for the word, but it's to inspire people to take care of others. And so that's why we exist, that's what we do. And so it's just, we try to build an environment of care, inspiring others to care for others. And the people that we hire are as important as the food we serve. So, did that answer your question? It's actually been tough, I'm not gonna lie. There is a lot of jobs open. Anybody that needs a job, you can go work for Chick-Fil-A, just let me know. So you can cook waffle fries if you want to. No, but that's why Grayson's working there this summer. They just need help. And so much so that I went up there one day during lunch and worked, and it was just to see what they were going through. It was a mess. I spilled 6 drinks, taking drinks to cars. I really did. I spilled 6 drinks. But I think the operators all went through a really, really tough time. I may not have sitting in my corporate seat, but they really, really went through some tough times, not just hiring, but to continue to have that perspective that people count on when they are being stressed out so much by closing the dining rooms and really having to almost rethink how we do business outside. So I think we did fine. The operators struggled a lot though. So, and it's hard to keep inspiring care when you're struggling. So they did it.
Thanks, Lauren. Bob, would you like to go?
We've used kind of this analogy that typically for UPS, that window between Thanksgiving and Christmas end of the year is what we call our peak season, the busiest time of the year. The pandemic basically threw us into peak mode almost instantaneously. And then when you look back, we've had almost, in some cases, 6 or 7 peak periods back to back to back with no break in between. And obviously, not only, I think, the physical demand on everybody, the mental demands on everybody, I think the realization of that. But I'd say to the question about brand, it comes down to, I think, every organization, small or large, has a culture. And that culture is created, by its people, by the founders that, built the company up, built the organization up. We do too. I mean, this culture of for UPS, it's definitely hard work, it's integrity, it's customer focus. And over the years, that gets passed on because as the generations change through it, even though, like I said, the world society is changing, there's things in the culture that are sustainable and passed on to, as new employees come in and understand who UPS is and what everyone's role is and how they play a part to ensure that every customer is, not only, we meet the expectations, but try to exceed the expectations worldwide. And whether that customer is another business, whether that customer is the end receiver of something, in a residential location, that's the challenge to how you not only communicate that, but really get an understanding to the point that your employees live, I think, the culture and represent, the culture that has made them successful for so many years.
Thanks, Bob. Shauna?
So in Kia's world, when you talk about the culture, automotive is a very fluid industry. There is never one day that repeats itself the same. It's constantly a changing environment. We are continually faced with challenges, whether they're external or internal. We are used to a culture of being in an environment of change. So when the pandemic hit, it was, okay, this is another thing we have to deal with. How do we deal with it? And I think because we have some very stable procedures and processes, that it allowed us to flex those as far as we could to be able to make the necessary adjustments and changes to our flow of operations and our inbound supply of materials to keep up with the production plan that was getting ready to bounce all over the place for us. And communications for us is a very big piece of being able to follow those processes and ensuring that everyone's compliant to what we need them to be doing, and staying in direct contact with our supply base, domestically and within the overseas facilities that we're working with, is what kind of helped us get through maintaining our current culture, because our employees internally, they're used to that. So it didn't really rattle them so much, as that they were able to just, work through the problem. Were there challenges? Absolutely. I mean, it was one of the most difficult years that we've ever seen in all of our careers. And we've got some very tenured people in my department directly and in the plant as well. So it stressed everyone to the limits. But again, because there's stability in our processes, we were able to keep those solid, so that way we could, adjust to what we needed to do, from a global perspective and a nation's perspective, and as well, for our local community.
Thanks, Shauna. Tyler, did you want to ask the question from our online viewers? The microphone isn't on. Thanks.
This was a question on our YouTube live chat from Ms. Waller. She said the semiconductor chip shortage is affecting many industries, and the automotive industry being one of them. Any insight about how the automotive industry is tackling this challenge?
For current shortages, yes, it's daily. It's a daily review of what do we need, what do we have, and when we're going to get it. Again, I'm going to go back to that stability in the procedure. So, we have tools that monitor our production requirements and our production plan to send our requirements to our supply base, so they can see, in advance what we're going to need and when it's due to us. But when you are facing a global part shortage, like with the semiconductors, it is very challenging. We use semiconductors in a lot of facets of the vehicle. I just learned of a new one today that I didn't realize took a semiconductor chip. But when you're up against every OEM needing the exact same component, and there's one supplier that's building all of them, and you're somewhat jockeying for position, you rely heavily on your global partners. Obviously, we're working closely with our headquarters on what our demands are, what are high runners, low runners, that types of things. What is the priority to the plant? And, when they look at West Point's need versus some of our domestic plants in Korea, we have to work with them on, from a marketability standpoint, which vehicles are more priority over others. And so we have daily conferences overseas, and we are working heavily with our Korean coordinators here locally to make sure they understand what our needs are and when our drop dead dates are, and working through those delivery challenges.
Thanks, Shauna. Was that the only question from the online? Okay. Any other questions from our in-person audience? Oh. Is the mic on?
Is the mic on?
Okay.
Hey, Bob, I'm my wife. That's what that hose is for. I do have a question though that sort of ties UPS in with this conference. We're all transportation professionals. And the words that showed up in 2020 for transportation were curbside real estate. With the increase in deliveries from UPS, that other company with the X on it, Uber Eats, Grubhub, you name it, the curbside became a very busy place. A lot of streets became blocked. I know in Edgewood, in Atlanta, there'd be a truck parked in the one lane northbound and a huge queue behind it as they deliver a package. Here's your opportunity to talk to transportation professionals and maybe address your view for how to address the curbside real estate issue.
Well, good point. Good question. I mean, the challenge is always how do we incorporate, all users of not only the roadways, but then what is on the curbside of the roadways. And whether it's, businesses, now you're seeing when you see, ground level, obviously you're seeing more and more retail, and then above, obviously being built into residential, just creates a greater challenge to bring in and deliver, as well as I think supplies and everything else that goes about. How do you incorporate, all the pedestrians and the cyclists and the vehicles along with, like I said, the businesses is a challenge. Is there dedicated space to know that, in some cases, like you see in downtown, it's a dedicated loading zone and only dedicated for, obviously, deliveries and pickups. The problem is, to your point, there are so many delivery and pickups that in some cases, one or two spots isn't enough for the 4 or 5 vehicles waiting to get in there. So the rotation and the cycling of it creates obviously challenges. For us, obviously, in some cases, the routes, the way that they're set up, the timing of it, for business deliveries, the residential deliveries, trying to design routes that are the most effective for both the customers as well as the employee to complete the day successfully. But I've heard, again, and we were lucky last year that in some cases, one of the, I hate to say, a benefit of the pandemic is the roads were less congested. The ability to get from point A to point B was a little bit improved. And we all know, again, especially around the Atlanta metro, traffic has somewhat returned to kind of, pre-pandemic levels. That creates challenges.
Is it the internet connection? I wasn't sure. Oh, it's all frozen. Oh, hey Bob, can you hear us?
Yes. Did you lose me?
Yeah, we lost you just for a minute. If you could just repeat that last little blurb you were saying, that would be great.
Well, I was just saying, again, since traffic in Atlanta metro and pretty much everywhere else in the country has returned to, if not pre-pandemic levels, close to that, the challenge is that now that we've seen, obviously, the opportunities and, how convenient it was that I could get somewhere in less time and not be stuck in traffic. But I think now we come to this whole congestion issue, and whether it's on the interstates or the side streets, there definitely has to be kind of the management of it as to what's the capacity, what's the purpose of the vehicle. Is it just transiting through an area, or to the question that Tom brought up, again, the curbside real estate and the value of even small amounts of it for a vehicle to be able to be there for a period of time to perform, essentially its job function, or again, what they're after, picking up, delivering, whether it's packages, food, furniture, business supplies, you name it.
Thanks, Bob. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, I'll go ahead and ask my next question, which is, what are some policies and procedures that your corporation put in place during the pandemic that you plan on keeping as we return to normal? Lauren, do you want to go first?
I think the main thing is the focus on the drive-through and the capacity in the restaurants that we will continue to focus heavily on. Chick-fil-A some of the cause of the backup on the curbside, as Tom said, but for that reason and others, we have been opening only 100 to 110 restaurants a year, but we're accelerating that just slightly this year, or next year, in 2022. We will be opening more drive-through only, so there's, I think about 30 or 40 in our system right now, but we'll start to open more of those. And as far as capacity goes, most of the restaurants that have been around a while were built, and there's been improvements to the kitchen, but were built mostly for $2 to $3 million of business, and they're doing 9 to 10, so the capacity is a real issue there too. And the other thing that at the corporate support center, we are starting what's called a flexible future, and I know that I assume that the other two will answer probably similarly, but we all realize productivity's improved, right? Like my commute goes from the top of my stairs to the bottom of my stairs. And they have rolled out what's called the flexible future with cultural cornerstones. And so cultures, like John's asked me, is really, really big to Chick-fil-A, and important to be in person, important to see one another. So it's been interesting the way this has kind of unfolded, but the cultural cornerstones are all events, activities, corporate-wide meetings, and conversations that require one-on-one, where we will start classifying meetings that way as cultural cornerstones. Other than that, we'll have flexibility, but they're asking us to go in 10 days a month, so which is really 2 days a week, and my team has decided we're going to be on site Mondays and Thursdays. So happy about that that's going to continue, and then they're going to continue the redeployments that I described, at will redeployments.
Thanks, Lauren. Bob?
I don't know necessarily it's a new policy or procedure, but I think it's a new awareness. And speaking personally from, again, my role in talking about health and safety, for the longest time, I would say the role was dominated, obviously, more safety in teaching people and the accountability, again, of working safe and driving safe. The pandemic brought this realization, I think, of just how critical, balancing health and safety is, both the physical health as well as the mental health. And there's definitely a lot of opportunities there, even with having had a program that speaks to wellness and well-being. The uptake and I think the acceptance of it has definitely accelerated. But also I think because we have a lot of people in a position that, are seen as, from an occupational health professional, their visibility and the demand for them really was accelerated through the pandemic, and it still maintains that to this day. And I think that's because obviously people have come to depend on them. Even now, hopefully, as we start to see it kind of hopefully, pulling back a little bit, no question, we don't know what the new norm of the world is going to be. And we still have a lot of uncertainty, but as you try to kind of build stability into that, that's from a standpoint in the role to say, okay, from a health and safety standpoint, there's nothing more important for any individual, let alone their family and their peers and their colleague. And even as an organization, if we have a healthy and safe workforce, you have a healthy and safe organization. I think the other key of that, also is probably going to fall into just, remote work. Prior to the pandemic, we had opportunities of it, and there was areas where it was already being used, but not, broad-based and not across all spectrums. We got forced into it like everybody else did. And I think the new realization of, surprised a lot of people, it works. So I think there's a lot of new opportunity and still in discussions and still being evaluated to what is that new norm for the work environment, especially for, the offices where there is that option of, do I work at home? Do I work in the office? What is the frequency of that? Yet to be determined.
Thanks, Bob. Oh, my microphone's not working. Thanks. Oh, that was not working either.
Hold, please.
Oh, thanks, Bob. Shauna, what about you guys?
So, along the same lines, the pandemic taught us how to rethink of how we conduct business and, how we communicate. When you're in a manufacturing facility, it's critical that we meet together and we discuss things and we develop plans and strategies and have collective agreements on, daily operations and, what's coming at us in the weeks and months ahead. So not being able to have face-to-face meetings or even one-on-one discussions was a huge challenge in our plant specifically. So, the virtual meeting really allowed us to be able to utilize that technology to continue business as usual, where we would have just, walked a few feet down to an office or met in a conference room. And even, we talked about meetings with our suppliers and our local partners. Yes, you can use other avenues, but again, having that face-to-face interaction and an open discussion forum where it's not so much user-friendly on a conference call really helped us to maintain those lines of communications, because the flexibility that we needed to have, was restricted there for a while with people being remote and, having to restrict our closeness to one another and having to be able to keep with social distancing. Those are the types of things that from an employee perspective we wanted to protect, but then we still have to run the plan and run the business as normal. So for us, the virtual meeting taught us that we can use it more internally as well as for external purposes too. We do support 3 shifts. So the virtual meeting helps us record training sessions or record meetings so that our second and third shift team members can hear those messages and participate in those discussions without having to adjust work schedules to come in early or stay late or that type of thing. So the technology of the virtual meeting for us was very crucial, especially in my department directly.
Thanks, Shauna. And I think we only have a few minutes left, so I'll go ahead and ask the last question before we wrap it up, which is, knowing what we know now as we're coming out of the pandemic, would your corporation have adapted to any differently over the past year? Lauren?
Sure. I think optimizing, is this working? Yeah. Okay. Optimizing our curbside processes, and by curbside, I don't mean what Tom was saying. I mean pulling into the parking lot and knowing where to go when you're picking up your order. So we didn't have really any processes in place for that. The operators had to just get out and number the parking spaces, and people would pull in, and we had to update the app a few times to kind of get that right. So I think they will leave that, now that we have the processes, leave that open as an option for operators to continue if they want to. Then I also think we would have ramped up delivery testing sooner, like with the food products. How do you keep waffle fries warm, etc. And I think we would have rolled out with more Chick-fil-A led delivery than DoorDash, because there's with delivery, the operator's paying a lot of the profit to the DoorDash and Uber Eats folks when if they do it themselves, obviously profit's higher, and we can also deliver that extra care and service that people expect from Chick-fil-A. So
Thanks, Lauren. How about you, Bob?
I don't know if there's anything substantial that, you kind of look back going, as we went into the pandemic, there was so much, and I think every organization had to do this. Your tracking mechanisms, internally, probably related to COVID and employee workforce and how we managed operations, the supply chains, even internally. That, I think, it all just taught everyone you have to be definitely more agile and more adaptable and being able to make decisions on the spot, because time mattered. I think, it also showed the importance of business continuity planning. I know we've gone through exercises, and you do the usual, natural disasters and everything else, but I think this brought out a whole new insight regarding not only what we thought initially was isolated to one part of the world, and then, as this was growing at such an accelerated rate, but then everybody still, I think in the first couple of weeks, were thinking, hey, this is only going to be a couple of weeks, we'll get through this. And weeks turned into months, turned into a year, and you look back at all that going, okay, what those lessons learned are, and making sure, like I said, we've adapted that into, all your operating plans and your contingencies in case.
Thanks, Bob. How about you, Shauna?
Yeah, very much along the same lines as, making sure that we had solid processes, solid communication set up, that if something did not go the way that it was supposed to, that the contingency plan picked up and, it activated and helped us drive through whatever that was. But having the confidence in our standards and procedures is what allowed us to make the quick and sudden changes to our production environment. And we learned that flexibility is crucial. You can't just get on a one track and say, okay, this is the way I've done it, and I'm always going to do it this way. Well, that mentality wasn't going to work. And be quite frank with you, it really does work when you work for Kia, because prior to May, we were the power to surprise, and we do. But, having that open-mindedness and being able to accept new ideas and new ways of doing things, and, again, stressing our procedures to their limits and making sure that they were solid enough to support what we needed to do, that's where we saw, when you look back over it, what could you have done differently? It's going back to the basics. Are your procedures in place, and are they solid? And if they're not, where are the holes? And let's go back and fill those in and rewrite those, so that way, if we come across this again, or if we have something worse happen, what do we need to do differently for that? Because automotive is a contingency-based operation. Things don't go great every day. So, we're used to going to plan B and plan C. Well, what would be plan D is kind of what our mentality of a lessons learned and a reflective viewpoint of what we went through the last, 12 to 16 months.
Thank you, Shauna. I just wanted to give a huge thanks to all of our panelists. I know that you guys aren't normally attendees of Georgia ITE, so we thank you so much for volunteering your time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.